The views expressed in the following podcast are those of our own and not the opinions or views of the Guardian Resilience Team, the Space Force, the Air Force, or the Department of Defense. Without further ado, today we have here with us Lieutenant Cohen Williams. First off, Lieutenant Williams, will you just introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Hey, Lieutenant Cohen Williams here. I'm currently stationed here at Schriever Space Force Base. I commissioned from the Air Force Academy in 2020. Suffered a lot through there, academically, physically, so whole 9 yards. After that, I got that amazing opportunity through the Space Force to go to grad school for 2 years, which was an awesome opportunity for me to experiment with a lot of different types of fitness, mental, physical, emotional, all the above. After that grad school experience, I went out to California for undergraduate space training. I was there for about 8 months. After that, I came out here to Schriever. So still fairly new in the overall Space Force career process, but loving what I'm doing and happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So when we think about health in the Space Force specifically, right? One of the things that a lot of individuals struggle with is how to be healthy in a Space Force lifestyle. So can you tell us a little bit more about like what goes into like the daily life of a Space Force Guardian from like what your experiences have been so far? Maybe is it different in the training pipeline than it is in an operational setting? Are you on shift work all the time? Does it ever change off of shift work? Are you ever just like a normal 9 to 5 schedule? Just tell us a little bit more about like sort of the schedule for the Space Force overall, please.
Right, absolutely. So prior to start, I would like to caveat that the Space Force is unique from a lot of the other services in the sense that it's harder to dictate a specific physical skill set that is needed for our job, since the majority of our jobs is largely sitting in windowless rooms and operating extremely, highly technical systems. It can be difficult to specifically set out a set of fitness guidelines. So I actually like what the Space Force is doing with the HHA program and our nice smartwatches. It allows a way for people to have a little bit more flexibility. That's one of the things that drew me to the Space Force in the first place, was that allure of potential flexibility that I would be able to still live within my life. Now, when it comes to concepts like shift work or training or just even day shift, uh, it can get complicated because every single unit's a little bit different in the way that they manage it.
Sure.
However, I think the interesting thing is that it still allows you a pretty large amount of free time without a lot of mandated physical activity. I mean,
Sure.
you look at Army units and they're doing PT multiple times a week, waking up at 4:30 in the morning.
Yep.
Right, that's a great way to ruin any sort of like physical, like personal initiative on your own. If you have goals, right, and you're waking up at 4:30 and staying until 5, and you're already dog tired, that's pretty difficult. So the Space Force, I think, is a little bit easier in that sense. So with that caveat aside, there's still challenges that come with it, right? Day shift, you're showing up at 7:30, you're sitting at a computer, may or may not have great lumbar support, right? Then you leave at 4 and you're going home, you're pretty wiped, like mentally. Physically, your body might be primed, but mentally, that's a hard burden for a lot of people to get over. Same thing for shift. If you're working a mid shift overnight, showing up at 10, leaving at 6 a.m. That can be really rough on the psyche, like mentally and emotionally. So again, physically, our bodies have probably the optimum recovery time out of any service. But it's really difficult on the mental and emotional side. So I know, at least for me, it's a lot easier for me to work out earlier in the mornings, start my day off with that, rest for about 45 minutes, go on a walk with my dog or something, then hit a workout, then go to workout.
Sure.
That's a little bit simpler for me, easier mentally for me on the back end of the day, get that back end to relax and recover.
Sure.
But the biggest thing is just to have flexibility in the way that you approach your fitness, and also be relatively lenient with yourself. If you're dog tired, recover, rest, use that energy for the next day.
For sure. Yeah. You talk a lot about like the different aspects of physical recovery, mental recovery. Talk a lot about, of course, like how to manage training, your timeline and schedule and whatnot. It kind of feeds into like the overall picture with what we look at from a Guardian Resilience Team perspective of like how to become the healthiest versions of ourselves, right? Which is, we talk about that 5 factors of health model, right? So it's like how we move, how we eat, how we recover, how we think, and then how we connect with others, right? And so from those, we're going to go over like each one of those factors here, and I'll talk to you a little bit more, just talk a little bit more in depth about how you manage each one of those factors sort of in like your own daily life, and then how you would do that and recommend most individuals in the Space Force may be able to manage those factors in their lives,
Sounds
right?
good.
So we'll just go one by one. We can start off with the just movement, right?
Yeah.
When we think about movement, it's all movement matters, right? So it's parking far away, it's taking your dog for a walk,
Mhm.
but it's not just a 5 minute walk, right? It could be a 20 minute walk, that kind of stuff. In addition to the training we do in the gym, in addition to do you do strength training and conditioning training, like how do you manage your overall movement, and what do you do or recommend for others for training?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing, like you said, is just move every single day. I mean, a couple weeks ago, went through some pretty strenuous cardio, activities, 2 days straight. My body was absolutely destroyed. I still, the next day or in the next couple days where I was actively resting and recovering, I was not doing anything intense,
Yep.
still managed to go on a walk with my dog, did some lawn work with a friend, just
Yeah.
was able to go outside and do something that enabled my body to remember that it was still moving, right?
For sure.
That's a critical thing that I think a lot of people tend to overlook, right? It's not how often you work out each week, like, oh, I'm doing 4 days a week of super
Yeah.
intense workouts, right? Your body's probably not recovering those other 3 days unless it's like tricked into remembering, like, oh, I'm supposed to be recovering,
Right.
right? So that's a big aspect. And again, like, I mean, everyone's different. Everyone has their own passions, and my example is just one of many,
Sure.
right? Like, I personally really enjoy strength training and like cardio. That's for some reason, like, it's not necessarily like the super intense CrossFit stuff. That's not as much my jam. It's not necessarily the yoga side of
Sure.
things, or like the power walking or anything like that. Like, I want to be able to go run 15 miles and then also bench 300 pounds later that day, right?
Sure.
That's what makes me happy, and for some reason that's why I'm able to continuously kind of hijack my brain into continuously progressing on.
For sure.
um, so is there anything like specific within that overall movement picture that
Yeah.
you guys are interested in?
Yeah, I think you talked about like the goals that you have set up for
Hmm.
yourself sort of make you happy, right? So
Right,
like how does the overall like attitude you have toward
right.
exercise influence like your daily exercise routine?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, like, I'm also a human. I enjoy having a life, and going outside with friends, and going out and having occasional drink here and there, hosting barbecue. So I do value, and that, I know, connects into the actual connection piece later.
Yeah.
But it is very important to me not to give my entire self to one specific aspect of my life.
Sure.
I think that can be potentially dangerous for me, at least, mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
So, and as well as physically, to overburden yourself with one thing, can cause detriments in other aspects of your life. So
Right.
I always try to shoot for like a solid 75 or 80% intensity, or focus in what I'm doing. And when I choose to, be in a period of growth in a specific area of my life, sometimes, like, while I was in grad school, I was largely just experimenting, but maintaining
Sure.
my physical fitness levels for about 2 years.
Yeah.
And, there's no harm or foul in doing that,
Right.
as long as you don't like drastically regress in any specific aspect of your life.
Sure.
So for me, maintaining like an 80% focus on something allows me to increase my capability in that area. For example, whether that's strength training or running or rucking, allows me to get tougher, allows me to get stronger, allows me to push boundaries I never thought before, but helps me prevent the crash loading that a
Sure.
lot of people, especially if they're starting out in their fitness, and I've even seen people 10 years into their fitness careers, crash load. And, I experimented with some small up cycles and stuff like that in grad school, and
Sure.
only thing that's ever hurt my body for longer than a couple
Yeah.
months.
Yeah.
It's again, just my opinions, right? Everyone has different things that work for them, but
Of course.
avoiding that extreme stress and strain on my body
Sure.
has always allowed me to wake up the next morning and maintain the same set of goals.
Sure.
Like, for example, I just started a new powerlifting cycle. It's the first time that I've actually ever had a true program to
Sure.
follow in my life. And the first 2 weeks were, like, it's harder workouts or longer workouts, more load than I was used to.
Yeah.
Took a little bit of time, but at least the program that I'm using almost seems to maintain that 80% level as well. Like, 80% effort on a max rep rather than pushing you to
Right.
do insane reps and loads every
Sure.
single day.
Yeah.
So that allowed me mentally to kind of tune in with this program really well. It also allows my body now, 2.5, 3 weeks later, to be that's my new normal now. And my body's used to that level
For
of
sure.
load. So at
Yeah.
least mentally, that's what helps me maintain that level of movement.
Awesome. How do you then manage the consistency aspect of training or just movement overall
Right.
when you're on the night shift that like
Right.
no one wants to be on. So like how do you sort of manage your training whenever you go into a night shift? What's like a standard night shift schedule for you?
Yeah. So for me, a standard night shift schedule, and every unit's different. You know, it could be 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or midnight to 8, 11 to 7. Doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, you are showing up to work at the nighttime hours and you are leaving as the sun's coming up most days,
Sure.
which is not necessarily how our human brain was designed to
Yeah.
experience the day or experience life. So it can be a little bit disorienting for your body. So the big thing is just grace and patience with yourself. If you have a couple days where you're just not on it, that's okay. Like while you're in the middle of recovering or shifting over to mid shift. Most units nowadays, I think, are doing where you're on mid shift for several weeks or at least a
Okay.
week,
Yeah.
even up to like a month or more
Right.
of consistent mid shift with it, which at least allows your body to kind of reset to that schedule. It
Sure.
will still take a few days. Again, get outside, just move for 20 minutes. Maybe when you get back and the sun's still up, or you crash, you sleep for 6 hours, you wake up, the first thing you do is go sit outside on your porch,
Sure.
maybe mow the lawn, right?
Yep.
Something like that will allow your body to recover and move over to that new schedule.
Yeah.
Then setting those goals like, hey, I want to, instead of working out, let's just use my powerlifting example, right? Rather than doing 5 days a week, I'm going to change it to 4 days a week
Sure.
for at least the next 2 weeks. Then I'll reevaluate. And I'm
Right.
going to be consistent with those 4 days. I
Yeah.
can promise myself that even if it sucks, as long as my body isn't, damaged,
Right.
right? I'm going to continue to do those 4 days. Just, don't drop the weight completely, right? Like,
Sure.
don't just like drop
Yeah.
the ball and say, hey, maybe in 3 weeks I'll be feeling better, because you likely won't be feeling the same as you do if you were working normal hours.
For sure.
So just allowing yourself that grace time, because what we do is abnormal.
Mhm.
It's absolutely not normal to the standard human condition, and it's insane to see some of these athletes in the Space Force that
Yeah.
are doing insane athletic activities while they're
Yeah.
pulling mid shifts for 6 months straight. It's
Right.
it's an incredible thing that just shows the level of grit and determination of some of our guardians.
Awesome. So you kind of talked a little bit about like the recovery pieces there, and
Yeah.
definitely how recovery can be a little bit more challenging on the night shift schedule. If we think about like the recovery
Right.
bucket side of things, one of the things we try to emphasize as a Guardian Resilience team is the aspect of recovery is not just physical; it's also that mental component of recovery. And the key aspect there is the sleep overall,
Absolutely.
right? So like a sleep is a critical piece of the recovery element. Can you tell us a little bit more about like how you manage the differences in sleep schedules whenever you're on a normal shift
Mhm.
versus whenever you're on a night shift? And then what other aspects do you kind of consider whenever you think about like recovery?
Right. So, I mean, on the sleep side, first thing is blackout shades. It'll save your life,
Sure.
especially if you're working, different hours. If you're waking up at 10 because you were working a swing shift and you were up till 1 or 2 a.m.,
Yeah.
right? You still need those blackout shades.
Yeah.
That will at least help trick your brain. And the light is a big aspect of sleep. I know that you've
For
talked
sure.
about this before, right? Having low light, so below the eye line,
Yep.
right? While you're preparing for sleep, right? That helps. And just kind of keeping things dimmer in general when light is supposed to be dim, or at least
Yeah.
when you're trying to trick your body into thinking it's nighttime,
Right.
right? Keeping those, the shades closed, right? The low lights on, below eye level, not all the fluorescent lighting above your head on. That
sure.
is a big aspect, and it's really just tricking your brain.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of chemical receptors and stuff in your brain that, that's actually pretty easy to trick if you think,
For sure.
and if you do things consistently.
Yeah.
Routine is another big aspect. I mean, I have not been the best with sleep across my life. I mean, especially like with different like types of schooling or training. You have other activities you're trying to do outside of that as well. You're trying to maintain a social life. It's difficult, especially when you're young and all your friends are going out and partying and stuff. Like, not a knock against that. Against that, it's fun to do every once in a while, but
Sure.
you have to like, uh, again, give yourself some grace, because when you're 20 to 30 years old, it's not going to be a perfect road. It's not going to be like you're the 45-year-old,
Sure.
father of 4 that's just able to lock in their schedule, right? So another aspect of that is what you put into your body, especially before bedtime. So
Sure.
avoiding nicotine and caffeine within
Yeah.
like a certain amount of going to bed, because those do change the way that the chemicals in your brain are reacting with its outside environment. And as well as like food, if you
Yep.
shovel, a bag of Cheez-Its, into your mouth 30 minutes before going to bed, your body's probably going to be processing that, and it's going to be pretty wired.
Yeah.
So keep probably just water and tea for a couple hours, before going to bed is a big aspect. Same thing with alcohol, right? Generally now when I do drink, it's I typically try to be done drinking by like 6 or 7.
Sure.
no matter how much I was drinking. And then that way I can, recover and kind of rinse out my body with water. That
Sure.
way, by the time I do go to bed around 9 or 10, it's good. I usually need about 8 hours of sleep. I know everyone's a little bit different, but 8 hours
Yeah.
is what I found is the consistent for me that, at least according to the watch, says I'm well rested and I feel
Sure.
well rested too.
Awesome. Okay, so the next thing that is a real challenge with a lot of individuals, especially with the variable schedules, especially with being at work, especially whenever you're working in like a skiff facility, right?
Mhm.
It can be really challenging to want to just snack on the unhealthy items and have a full snack bar of ho-hos and Twinkies,
Right.
right? How do you manage your nutrition as a Space Force Guardian?
Right. So first off, just remember that I am speaking as a snacko. That Snackos and the booster clubs are out to get you. They do put the unhealthiest things in the snack club in order to get you to pay money and help boost the booster club's funds. So just that caveat out there.
Yep.
But it is hard. I mean, sometimes at 3 a.m., generally like most people when they're up that late, they just want something salty or they want something sweet. That's when your brain and your body aren't really in great sync because again, it's unnatural to be
Right.
awake at that time of night. And so your body just kind of reverts back to a bit of a survival mode where you want those high caloric, items.
Yep.
So, avoiding staying up at 3 a.m. as much as possible is always a good thing, but sometimes we can't with our job. So at least for me, two big things have kind of driven my nutrition in life. The first one is not necessarily eating more than you need. So what that means for me is if I'm in like a maintenance phase or if,
Mhm.
life is going, in all sorts of crazy directions, I'm super busy at work. I'll generally try to really, only focus on eating as much as I need to maintain my level of activity that's going to help me stay where I am. And that's really not a lot of food. I mean,
Yeah.
that's probably maybe 2,500 calories a day, which
Sure.
is realistically 2.5 meals. So
Sure.
that's like, maybe 2 meals and a snack or a small breakfast and
Sure.
decent sized lunch and dinner, nothing crazy, right?
Yep.
And then if I'm actually in a growth phase, right, or if I'm trying to like push my body in a certain direction,
Yep.
Obviously you're going to need a little bit more because if you're working out or running for 2 hours, as compared to like 45 minutes or an hour a day,
Mhm.
doubling that, obviously you're going to need more calories because your body is actively recovering throughout the day and it's going to need to be able to draw on those nutrients resources. The second thing is cook your own food as much as humanly possible.
Right.
I mean, buy the easiest thing is just buy yourself some prep ware, some Tupperware, and get a Costco membership or Sam's Club membership, or just go buy bulk at your Walmart. Even you just buy bulk meat, bulk carbs, bulk veggies, and some seasonings, and
Sure.
it's kind of crazy how much you can kind of make. Between like pork loin, chicken breast, ground beef, and
Sure.
a bunch of different veggies. It's actually kind of easy to especially with the different kinds of seasonings, to maintain like a nice little variety. Now, of course, like for me at least, I usually have like not really cheat weekends, but it's where I try not to care as much is on my
Sure.
weekends. Right, I'm still training, I'm still doing things depending on how my weekend is turning out. But I tend to bother myself a little bit less with specifically what foods and how much of it I'm putting in my body. That doesn't mean I go and smash 4 Costco pizzas in one day,
Sure.
right? Because one, I probably couldn't do that anymore. But
Sure.
it's that's a little bit unrealistic, right? It's not good for you,
Yep.
right? But if I go and maybe eat out twice on a Saturday, right, lunch and dinner, right, have a couple beers with my friends, or if I throw a barbecue, right, make a bunch of pulled pork, I'm probably eating half of that, right?
Sure.
That's a-okay because the big rule is that the majority of the time you're eating healthy and you're eating the amount that you need. Like the whole caloric deficit thing is pretty important, but it's measured over the course of like days or a week plus, right? It's
Sure.
not necessarily what you if you overeat one day, it's not going to kill you,
For
right? So it's just really managing what you're putting in your body, and a big aspect of that too is just managing incentives. If I have a Tupperware full of baked broccoli and chicken sitting in my fridge, right? I don't want that to go bad,
Yeah.
so I'm probably going to eat it, right?
Right.
And then if I eat that, I'm not going to want some Cheetos later.
Right.
Also, bringing lunch to work, it's still probably about the same price as the defect.
Sure.
It's going to be a little bit healthier too. So whether you're working swing shift or mid shift, just bring that midday that lunch. Maybe
Yeah.
bring a protein bar as well. Some of them
Right.
taste like Snickers. They're not bad,
Yep.
right? that does help at least drag down some of those kind of snack bar-ish items.
Definitely.
Of course, still invest heavily in your snack bar. Just don't maybe not eat out. Just put
Yeah.
money in there.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, still like even for me, I'll put 50 cents in, grab a small bag of Cheez-Its
Sure.
maybe once a week, right?
Sure.
Just because it's something to reward myself if I felt like I did especially well that day.
Sure.
Doesn't really matter. But just again, be a little bit gracious with yourself and just set those good incentives and kind of that broad 80% structure in your life. Try to have
Sure.
that locked down.
Yeah. So you talked about like is every single snack bar basically composed of the same items, or is there ever any opportunity to have healthy items in that snack bar?
It depends generally. So typically, at least in my personal experience, it has seemed like the healthy items tend to not be purchased at the same rate, right?
Sure.
Like so, generally they're a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
As in like $2 as compared to 50 cents,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which it can be a factor for some people, and they also tend to not, you know, play the same role in the brain at 3 a.m. right as
Sure.
some of the other snacks do.
Yeah.
And I know some snack bars are different. Like it depends on like the funding or how enthusiastic the people are
Right.
that are managing it. Right. Some of them have popcorn machines or incredible drink machines. I'm sure there's a unit out there with a smoothie bar. Right. All those things likely exist, but for probably your average Squadron snack bar, it's your ho-hos, it's your
Sure.
Twinkies, it's your
Yeah.
Cheez-Its, it's your chips, and they're all pretty doggone cheap too.
Yeah.
So you got quarters or dollar bill on you.
Right.
You can. It's not going to fill you up though, but
Right.
it will make you happy for probably about 15 minutes
Yeah.
before you go grab another.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big piece there with the nutritional aspect of
Absolutely.
how we talk about it from a Gardner Jones team standpoint. You talked about that 80-20 rule.
Yeah.
Like for the most part, we're trying to eat minimally processed foods, right? We're trying to eat natural foods from whole grains, lean protein, fruits and vegetables, and so on. For the vast majority of the food that we're consuming on a daily basis, and then like just coming prepared with the snacks, I think is a really
Yeah.
key thing, because if you have access to a choice that is objectively better,
Mm-hmm.
then that's what you have access to, and like you're going to make the right choice, right? A lot of times, like the way I like to phrase it is sort of like make the right choice the easy choice, right? Which is kind of what you're saying with like bringing the lunch with you and like making the right choice the easy choice,
Right.
And so if it's there and it's available, that can help a lot,
Right. Exactly. And not bringing quarters and dollars with you to
Sure.
work, right?
Yeah.
That again, most people don't carry cash on them anyways, but
Yeah.
for some reason they do when it comes to snack bars.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
not to bash the booster clubs or anything like that, but like to not bring that cash in every single
Sure.
day is a great incentive, because where are you gonna go?
Yeah.
Ask your buddy for 50 cents for a bag of chips? That's
Right.
significantly harder to do
For sure.
than to just eat the protein bar that's in your lunchbox.
Definitely. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so we've talked about like the movement component. We've talked about the recovery. We've talked about the nutrition. We think about the self-talk and then the social connection aspects. You talked a little bit about the self-talk and as it relates to, if you feel really bad on any given day, and you feel as though training is not in your best interest today, or you just don't feel like it on that day, being gracious with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like that sort of self-talk aspect? And then when things are really challenging at work, or whenever you've faced different pieces of adversity and whatnot, sort of like how you tackle those pieces of adversity through your health and wellness.
Right. So with the gracious piece, I think something that someone out there might misconstrue that as is creating excuses for yourself or to reinforce that specific negative feeling. Like if let's say you just moved on to mid shifts and you're feeling horrible because you got 3 hours of sleep, right? Obviously, there's aspects of your actual mental and physical recovery that are tied together. So your body might not be at peak performance, but it's most likely that your brain is telling you everything's going crazy. Here's a bunch of negative influence to help you not do anything. Right. So again, it's important to be gracious with yourself. Go out on a 20-minute walk.
Sure.
Cut that as a minimum and promise yourself that the next day you're going to stick to a good solid 45-minute workout, right, in the gym, or 45-minute light jog, or something that's a little bit higher than just a walk, right? That's an extremely important aspect. Don't necessarily reinforce those excuses that your brain is trying to give you, right? You counteract that by saying, well, I'm still going to do something, and the next day I'm going to do a little bit more.
Right.
And again, if you are feeling a strong physical negative reaction, to that, not just mental and emotional, then, give yourself a little bit more grace, a little bit more rest and recovery time as you continue to slowly escalate. Maybe don't jump right back into your normal schedule after a day or two, but try to continuously push that. Your brain is, in some ways, it's like outside of yourself, and you need to wrestle with it sometimes. You
Sure.
need to be able to engage it in a productive and positive way, because your brain can be either your best friend or your worst enemy. So that self-talk aspect is critical, especially if you are working some of those weird shifts, or if you do have a large life event going on.
Right.
It's very important to hijack that aspect into being a positive and productive thing that's going to make you healthier, make you happier, make you better rested, make
For
you a
sure.
better human and a better guardian overall.
Yeah.
No one wants to have the slug necessarily sit next to them in the office.
Yeah.
This is a great way to kind of hack that.
Definitely. A lot of that stuff does feed into the social connection piece. You
Mm-hmm.
talk about like, want to have somebody sit next to you, in that way, just the same as we wouldn't want to be next to somebody that's incredibly pessimistic and whatnot, right?
Right.
When we are pessimistic in our own self-talk and when we're pessimistic in our own heads, a lot of times that's what, drives, the different experiences we have on a daily basis.
Right.
Right.
And we say that so flippantly, right? It's
Yeah.
extremely difficult to
Yeah.
do that. And for a lot of people, especially in the Space Force, right, where you're sitting in windowless rooms with sometimes it's
Right.
sun is down when you show up at work, so sometimes
Yeah.
it's still down when you come back,
Yeah.
home.
For sure.
That can be extremely difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So not to paint that with some sort of like, it's much easier said than done.
Definitely.
So I
Yeah.
think but it still maintains like almost a requirement that you put in a small amount of effort into that every single day.
Sure.
Don't need to change your life, go to some convention and have some guy sell you his book on how to
Yeah.
change your life, right? That's not going to work, right? It just
Right.
requires a small amount of effort every single day.
Yeah. And then, the final piece being that social connection aspect, we think about like the quality of our friendships, right? Not
Right.
necessarily just about the quantity, but like also the level of quality of our relationships and stuff, especially challenging in a military setting
Mhm.
with how frequently you move, right? With how frequently people PCS and go TDY and then, change shifts and whatnot. So how do you, sort of stay connected with the people that you've met so far?
Right.
And then how do you stay connected with individuals, that you care about and show then, as an officer, how do you show the enlisted individuals that you work with, that you care about them and create like
Right.
a culture of individuals that like care about one another with, that aspect of social connection.
Right. And
Yeah.
in some ways, the Space Force has kind of a unique challenge with this because there's a lot less shared trauma in the Space Force, right? Like you don't have like infantry school like you would in the Marine Corps, right? You don't have Ranger school. You don't necessarily have these extremely. You don't have a 13-mile ruck, right?
Sure.
That's mandated that everyone goes through,
Right.
right? Like you have less of those unique, and they're typically physical challenges, but with large mental and emotional aspects as well.
Yeah.
You have less of that in the Space Force, and again, I don't really have any opinions. I don't think we necessarily need any of those aspects, but it is still a fact that we have less of that. So that makes a lot of those immediate, really close bonds that are formed, right, really across ranks or really across like the spectrum. It's a little bit harder. It takes a little bit more intentional effort and focus to
Sure.
garner those.
Yeah.
So you mentioned friends after you PCS,
Sure.
right? Like that is a challenge. I'm an introvert, like through and through.
Mhm.
I would much rather prefer to keep my circle of 4 or 5 close friends. And realistically, if everyone else in the world stopped talking to me, I'd probably not notice, right? Obviously, that's not the same for everyone. And generally, I do seek actual more social connection than that because I recognize that that's probably not the healthiest thing.
Sure.
But the big thing is, at least for me, just letting people know every couple weeks, right? Maybe even every couple months. I'm a dude. Sometimes you'll go by and talk to your best friend 6 months after you last talked to them.
Yeah.
Haven't talked to them at all in between. Turns out they got married or something like that in that time frame. It's your best friend, right? But just letting people know that you do care about them, and just asking them about their life. And most people, if they get to know you, right, at least for me as an introvert, can't speak for everyone else. People know that it's not that I value my time so extremely when it comes to socialization and
Mhm.
connection, but that I'm very sincere in what I say. I don't say things flippantly, or I don't say things and not mean it.
Yeah.
So when I tell someone like, "Hey, you're one of my best friends. Like, thank you for being in my life,"
Sure.
that generally means a lot. So being serious about the way that you talk about connection, at least to me, is very important. I run with a small circle, and these people in the circle know that I care deeply about them.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that when I'm in a more work environment or a more
Yeah.
social environment, that I'm not making an effort to feel connected with the people around me, right? When I'm at work and there's 30 odd people around me at any given moment, right? Having conversations with them, not necessarily like going through the list of like, oh, how many kids do you have? How many dogs do you have? What are their names, right?
Right.
Where do you grow up? What was your high school like?
Right.
Like those questions don't really mean a ton.
Right.
And it's really, to me, it's just a factor of intentional time and
Sure.
active listening spent, right? And less about like what you are asking and more about like the amount of time that you are spent actively engaged with them, right? I
Yeah.
can spend 3 hours straight with somebody,
Yeah.
or it can be 10-minute chunks over the course of 3 weeks, and I'll likely feel the same amount of connection with them. Obviously,
Sure.
you have like professional boundaries that you need to respect, but just spending that time, whether that's on a working group or you're in meetings or you're working on a project or you just work in the same cubicle, building those, taking that small amount of time just to, think creatively about the job that you're doing, or to, if someone's going through a life event, like they're buying a house,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like, maybe talk to them, about that. And like, hey, like this is what happened when I bought a house, right? Doesn't really
Sure.
matter as much as the fact that you are actively and attentively focused on that individual during that period of time. And then it's just, like I said, factor time, it grows, and then boom, now hopefully have someone that trusts you, is connected to you,
Yeah.
and that increases not only team cohesiveness but also like reliability, amongst others.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that you have like the opportunity to try to dig into those deeper conversations, like when you're on shift, like whenever you're doing like crew schedule type stuff, like do you have the opportunity to discuss a lot of those sort of topics with each other? And then sort of, do you have any practical strategies to take it away from the surface level conversations to really get at like who that person is?
Right. So generally on crew, again, only speaking from my limited experience, I'm sure there's other experiences
Sure.
out there. There is a lot of downtime generally. Maybe you're only making 4 satellite contacts within a 8 hour period of time, or maybe
Sure.
you're in different missions where it's a little bit more engaged, right? But unless there's some massive global event going on, right, you're likely able to take a step back. Not to say that you can like completely go and work out for 4 hours, or
Right.
go play video games in the room across the hall if some squadrons have that or something, right? Like
Right.
that's not necessarily possible. You still have to be at least somewhat turned on,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't. It's unlikely that for your entire shift that you have to keep your brain actively engaged on your job that entire time. So there's a lot of downtime. Generally, people watch movies, play card games, right? Because you're generally not allowed to have your phone or anything like that. So some people work on their school,
Yep.
like master's degrees or undergrad degrees. They'll read
Yep.
books. So obviously, some of those activities are probably a little bit healthier for connection, social cohesion than
Sure.
others, right? Sitting down and watching the same, Shrek,
Yeah.
and you've watched it every single shift for the last year,
Yeah.
right? There's probably not contributing much to your ability to connect with the individuals around you. So having maybe card games are a little bit better, right? Because they at least induce some level of engagement and social connectiveness. I'm not
Right.
a social scientist by any means, but I'd imagine that some of those
Sure.
activities more on that spectrum will be more helpful. Of course, something that other people might not consider is that not everyone can engage in a group setting.
Sure.
If you have, let's say, 8 people on the crew, it's unlikely that every single one of those individuals will garner the same amount of connection, or maximize or optimize their level of connection with that unit by doing the same activity. So right, so if you're, for example, crew commander, or if you're crew chief, right, or even if you just feel like you have a voice in your crew or in your shift work,
Right.
right, speak up and ask for diversity of activities right during that downtime. Whether that is just like, hey, maybe for the first couple hours we're just gonna kind of split off into not cliques necessarily, but here's a pair over here talking, here's 3 people over here working on something,
Sure.
and there's the 2 people studying for their exams that they have the next day.
Yeah.
So just having that awareness of the needs of different people to be connected, and especially if you're in a leadership position, you should be extremely attentively focused, right? I mean, it's the whole thing like leaders, eat last, right? Same thing for this, right? Like your mental health is extremely important, your emotional health is extremely important, but it's also very easy to take that to an extreme where you don't necessarily pay attention to what the needs of the people that are working with or
Sure.
around you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I think we had a pretty wide range of topics that
Hmm.
covered there. But when we think about like other things we may not have covered so far, one of the things I'd like to ask is, do you have any other resources that you have found as very influential to your learning and understanding of a holistic, healthy
Right.
lifestyle? That whether that's books, whether that's podcasts, whether that's other things that you want to like
Hmm.
steer people toward. Have you taken advantage of any other Space Force resources? Have you learned a lot from anybody in particular, or any different opportunity that you've had available to you? Like, what other resources and
Right.
opportunities do you recommend for Space Force Guardians to try to like reach out and go read or watch or listen to?
Yeah. I mean, probably at the most immediate level, right? Like the grit teams, like, what you're a part of, the PTL courses, talking to your PTLs, talking to your unit fitness managers, that is a great immediate resource.
For
And they'll
sure.
at least be able to point you in the right direction, right? That is a huge aspect because there's a lot, and just like anywhere in life right now, there's a lot of misinformation that's
Hmm.
all over the place, especially with how much social media is blown up and all the fitness influencers and health
For sure.
influencers, right? Not to say that everything that they are doing is wrong, but having a very healthy level of skepticism, I think, is what has gotten me to this point. It takes a long time for me to usually be convinced
Hmm.
of something. I want to be challenged. I want to be engaged. I want to know that what I'm doing is wrong,
Hmm.
right? Not just knowing that is wrong, because otherwise I'll probably just continue to do it. I want to know why. And I
Sure.
seek to improve that. And I seek to talk to people that are more knowledgeable about me. Like, for example, in grad school, one of my roommates, he has every single hobby that everyone hates, right? Like, he's a power lifter. Now he's into CrossFitting and CrossFit and power or rock climbing. He's into whiskey, like all those things that everyone
Sure.
like loves to smack on. But he was a great resource for me to learn how to truly start to actually lift in a safe and healthy manner.
Sure.
He was one that got all my form all locked in. So seek those friends, but
Hmm.
again, at the same time, be careful about everything that is peddled to you, right? Even
Yeah.
this friend, like he convinced me to do a lot of things that I probably should not have done, just because my body either wasn't prepared for it, is more like crash oriented or something that just wasn't as healthy for my taste and for what I wanted to get out of fitness
Sure.
or my life. So having that skepticism, kind of develop the model that works for you, but continuously be focusing on evolving. So that means finding resources, right? Like, there is no such thing as too fit. There is such a thing as mentally, emotionally, physically unhealthy, right?
Sure.
But when you're talking about holistic fitness, it's always, you're always trying to reach the like Pareto optimality, right? There's
Sure.
always another small step you can reach. And that journey is almost as important, if not more important, than the actual fitness journey
Right.
itself. Is how do I look at my whole life? How do I become a healthier, happier person?
Right.
Like, it's like, what's the meaning of life, right? Or what, how do I be happy, right? All these, ancient philosophers, right? It's literally just like consistently working on trying to improve that, being skeptical and adopting things that you, after a little bit of experimentation, prove that it works for you.
Sure. That makes sense. Is there anybody like in particular that maybe you as a Space Force Guardian have really enjoyed, like digesting or consuming any of their
Mm-hmm.
content? Like any favorite books or favorite individuals that you like to learn from?
Right. So I forget the individual's name specifically, but probably like the fitness or health related books that have impacted me the most. And you might know the author, like Born to Run and Natural Born Heroes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, they're fairly well known books, but specifically Natural Born Heroes was a very
Sure.
interesting one to me. I mean, I love the outdoors. I love to be outside, and my dream is to own property in the middle of nowhere, right?
Sure.
And they talk about these they found these rocks in like the island of Crete off Greece that had an inscription like so and so in this year, which is like like 400 BC, lifted this rock, right?
Sure.
They weighed the rock as like 1,300 pounds. It's
Sure.
like, okay, like that, like not even and like the mountain, right, can lift
Yeah.
1,300 pounds right now.
Right.
Like, that's absolutely insane. And these guys, like, they've beaten invasions from a variety of different empires, even like the Nazis and everything like that. Like, they were the ones that held off the
Sure.
invasion of Russia. Like, all these crazy stories of these
Yeah.
guys just running across mountains, just picking herbs or like milking a goat and eating it. Right? It's like these stories of how you can be like tied into your community, into the environment, into health in a way that is like fundamentally more natural, was really interesting to me. And the thing that stood out the most to it was, again, like we've talked before about like processed foods. So one, just eating good food, like whole
Sure.
foods as much as possible is a great aspect. But another thing is also realizing that progress and strength and speed and endurance and all those things in a way that is like healthier for you holistically
Mm-hmm.
comes with time. It's not something that
Sure.
you can do in 6 months.
Right.
Right. I mean, I've been, lifting, like strength wise for probably about 8 years now. And, I have probably never seen a period of 6 months or 12 months where it's just increased drastically.
Mm-hmm.
And when that has happened, it's only been because of extremely dedicated training, but it's never been longer or never been shorter than probably 4 months.
Sure.
So all these aspects require a lot of kind of like habit adoption, making a part of your life, right? Like, if your life, let's say, 1,000 years ago on the island of Crete, right, was to run around and you're a messenger between towns, right? And they're like 20 miles apart over jagged rock and mountains. You're
Sure.
probably going to learn how to run on mountains really well slowly over that period of time. And then, boom, 10 years later, you're probably an elite when it comes like in the world of endurance running, right,
Sure.
on mountainous terrain. And it's not that you did that intentionally. It's because it was a habit of your life. So I know
Sure.
that's a bit of a ramble, but
Yeah.
I think that book specifically spoke to me a lot. I
Cool.
tend to be drawn a little bit less to more of like the kind of the more popular influenced kind of media venues out there right now.
Sure. Awesome. I mean, I think last question here then
Yeah.
is just like, do you have any other sort of like pieces of knowledge or resources, as it relates to, Space Force health and wellness that you'd like to, share?
Right. I mean, absolutely. Like contact your grit teams, contact your HHA professionals. Like the AFRL is doing a fantastic job with that, and all the opportunities that are a part of that is something that first off it's ever probably happened in a service at this level. It's really cool to
Sure.
look at the data, talk to the individuals, see the resources that they have, and also just again, it requires a consistent amount of small effort that's slowly growing. Not only
Right.
just effort, but also intentionality about what you are investing that time and energy into.
Yeah.
Don't crash. Don't just say, all right, I'm going to go. And again, if this is your thing, right, absolutely do this if this is something you can commit to. But don't just like sign up for a CrossFit gym on day one, right, and just say, I'm going to be the world's best CrossFitter in 3 years,
Right.
right? Like, again, like some people probably even put a shorter timeline on that. That's unrealistic, right? Focus more on how do I wake up every single day a little bit happier, a little bit healthier. Something
Sure.
that my friends have told me before that really has stuck with me is I want to be able to put a suitcase up on a plane when I'm 75, right? Hoist it above my head, put it into the slot, right? Or I want to be able to lift my kids up, right? Or I
Right.
want to be able to lift up my grandkids when I'm older, right? Those kinds of
Definitely.
things, right? Find what motivates you specifically with that long-term endurance aspect. Like what is going to have you healthy for as long as humanly possible, strong,
Right.
fit, emotionally, mentally, whatever that is, and start to strive towards it and start to think about, whether it's backwards planning or even just taking small steps forward, right? Any way of meeting that point is ideal. You don't have to be the strongest person in the world. You don't have to be the fastest.
Yep.
All you need to be is the happiest and the healthiest that you can possibly be.
Sure. Awesome. It's a great note to end it on.
Sweet.
So yeah, thanks for coming out today. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate it. Great conversation.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thanks
thank
so
you.
much. Awesome.